Now, here's just a little something to consider. If prices on average in Australia rose 5.6% in the past year, or 7%, whatever it is, and 8.6% in America, what happens in the next year if prices just stay at these elevated levels? The answer is there'll be an appearance that inflation has fallen. Central banks might pride themselves on controlling inflation, even though you are still paying the same high elevated prices. So let's bring in here Adam Creighton, Washington correspondent for The Australian and Sky News contributor. Adam, this is the pea and thimble trick, or this is the mathematics of inflation, aren't they? It might appear as though the central banks have actually done their job, but the people still are paying more money.
Yeah, look, that's certainly right, Ross. Actually, if you look back over history, you see that the relationship between short-term interest rates and inflation is actually very weak. I mean, it is, of course, what central bankers pride themselves on, that they have this tool, that they can affect inflation. And it seems that they do through various correlations, but the relationship is weak. And so, the point that I think you're making is that, they may jack up interest rates and prices might not actually come down. And then it's going to be very embarrassing.
Well, that's the point, because it was this week in the Congress where you had the Senator, Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat, say to Jerome Powell, very pointedly, if you raise interest rates, will food prices come down? He says no. He says, if you raise interest rates, will gas prices, petrol prices come down? He says no. And this is the point, and that is a situation where you've really got the point that there's not a great relationship or control between interest rates and the things that are creating the inflation in the first place.
Yeah, look, she's perfectly right there, I would say. I mean, what needs to happen, the mechanism, if you like, is a very unfortunate one. It's something central bankers don't like talking about. But the mechanism, of course, is a recession. So that is how inflation comes down. Interest rates go up a lot. That means businesses lay people off because their costs go up. Cost of mortgages goes up, so asset prices come down, and so people feel poorer, so they spend less. That is the mechanism, if you like. It's not a direct reduction in prices. And indeed, Larry Summers, just this week, the former Treasury Secretary, he said that basically the unemployment rate in the US needed to be well above 5% for a number of years to really see any headway on inflation. And of course, that would be a recession, because the unemployment rate currently in the US is 3.6. It's very low, just like it is in Australia. So central banks are essentially going to have to induce a recession to get prices down.
OK, so then I get there as to why, therefore, would you do harm to people who lose jobs and therefore go onto welfare, which hurts the government's budget? Why do you need to do this? Why would you not simply let the maths eventually bring the inflation rate down and for the central bankers to say that they've done their job?
Well, look, what central banks would say, firstly, that's a great political question. Throughout history, people on the left have said that unemployment is a far worse evil than inflation, and people on the right have tended to say that inflation is far worse than unemployment. So it's a political question at the end of the day. But I think central bankers would say that what is the issue is expectations about inflation. That's what they're very worried about. They don't want households and businesses to expect inflation of 5 or 6% every single year, because once that happens, it's extremely hard to unwind, regardless of what the central bank does. And in fact, that's what Jerome Powell was saying this week at his testimony. He was very worried about inflation expectations, more actually than the rate of inflation. Now, so far, expectations are still a lot lower than that 8.6% figure you mentioned earlier. I think in the US, it's something around 4 or 5%, which is still too high. But if they stay around 4 or 5, the central banks will become very worried.
So the United States is either in recession right now, or most are predicting the recession will come. If that therefore triggers a global recession, and many are saying that Europe could go the same way, does that mean Australia can be immune? Because here you've had central bankers, you've had the major bank economists, you've had a whole range of people coming out saying, look, it might happen over there, but it ain't happening here. But they said that about inflation. They said that about rising interest rates, a whole bunch of stuff that didn't come to pass.
Yeah, look, from history, we know the Australian economy is obviously very linked to the rest of the world. It's a relatively small economy that trades a lot. But on the other hand, we're a huge resource exporter, and we're extremely dependent on the terms of trade in relation to exports, to coal prices, to iron ore prices. And so, we may well avoid a technical recession, just actually as we did in the global financial crisis, from memory. I don't think we technically had a recession. There was a bit of a downturn, but certainly nothing like the US and Europe. And so something like that may happen again. And, if it does, it'd be thanks to China, though, somewhat ironically, given how much, they've disliked us recently, but they're still buying that iron ore. And, that wealth is filtering through our economy still.
I'll tell you, Adam Creighton, always good to get your input on the program, and many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Ross.